Let's dive into the discussions shaping the nation.
Minister, the cost of living crisis hasn't gone away, far from it. Workers and families are still finding it very difficult to make ends meet. People face extortionate bills and prices right across the board, and for many it's never ending. It's runaway rents, childcare fees, the cost of a second mortgage, cost of the weekly shop and insurance costs. Perhaps where households have come under the most pressure is when it comes to rip-off electricity and gas prices. Over the last number of years, families have been hammered by a barrage of sharp increases in energy costs. They've just gone up and up, Minister, to the point where households in this state pay the second highest electricity prices in the EU. And this morning, unfortunately, there is more bad news for those households. An internal briefing document to the government from the Department of Energy and Climate shows that the energy rip-off is going to continue for 5 more years, that workers and families will continue to face increased electricity and gas prices every single year for the next 5 years. And as usual, big energy companies will enjoy more bumper profits, while ordinary workers and families already under enormous pressure get squeezed even further. The report goes on to advise, Minister, that households will need support from the government to meet these hikes, because households can't take any more, Minister. As the briefing to your government notes, gas bills are already 90% higher today than they were at the start of the crisis. Electricity bills are 61% higher. And what does that mean for people's pockets? It means that on average, people are paying a whopping €1,779 a year for electricity and €1,503 a year for gas. Is it any wonder that families in Ireland are being forced into energy poverty? We have hundreds of thousands of families in arrears. And let that sink in, Minister. What does that tell you as Minister? What does that tell the government? Well, it tells me and it tells many people watching that people are finding it harder and harder to pay these extortionate prices. How on earth are people supposed to afford the increases that are coming down the tracks, Minister? You need to answer that question. The government needs to answer that question, because there are struggling families the length and breadth of this country in despair this morning, and they don't have the answer, and they certainly don't have the means to pay for more increases. Incredibly, this briefing flagging further rip-off hikes in energy bills and calling for government supports for households was provided to the government in January. Yet your Minister, Jack Chambers, came out last month and announced to those same struggling families that there will be no more energy credits, despite being briefed that energy bills will continue to increase over the next 5 years. That's deeply cynical. I talk to people every day in my constituency, as I'm sure many people do, who tell me that they cannot keep up with their bills, that their lives are getting tougher, that they are struggling to get by every single day, every single month, doing their best, but they need support. And I'm sure everybody in this House meets people with similar experiences. Their concerns matter, Minister. Their lives matter. Their worries matter. The government can't keep talking about what it's done in the past, which is what you do and reach for when we raise these very serious issues. People are being hit by these bills now, today, and it's hurting them big time. If they are facing long-term energy price hikes, Minister, then they need long-term support. So, Minister, I'm asking you, do you now accept that the government has to step up to the plate? Will you continue to provide support for people to meet their energy bills? And will you assure householders today that you will come forward with measures that will provide relief to all of those families who are in desperate situations?
Thank you, Deputy Cullinane.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Thank you, Cancóla. The Government and all of my colleagues on this side of the House absolutely understand the consequences of the uncertainty of the world that we are now in, and what that means for households and for businesses. We see a world that has become more dangerous, a world that has become more volatile and full of uncertainty, and we in this side of the House are absolutely aware of the concern, of the anxiety that is causing to many within our country. Whether you're a small business trying to keep a job, whether you're a household worried about will they be able to pay their bills or keep their home in the future, I see that in the eyes of my constituents. All of us see that in the engagement that we have with those that we serve across the length and breadth of our country. This, of course, is most manifest when we deal with the cost of living. and the impact that increased bills are having on very many at the moment. In terms of what the government is currently doing in relation to this, we have to look at what we can do to prevent the impact of cost of living on households and businesses, and then the support that we can make available in the future. What we are already doing, for example, is the measures that we have in place in relation to the retrofitting of homes. €230 million invested in this scheme last year, helping over 7,000 homes. In the last 2 years, we've seen 129,000 energy upgrades to homes across our country, and this year's budget alone has €280 million set aside the Warmer Home Scheme, which is an 11-fold increase in that funding versus where we were a number of years ago. In addition to what we can do to prevent, to mitigate these kind of cost increases, which will be difficult, we also want to look at the regulatory model that we have here in Ireland, and that is why the government has laid out our commitment to assessing the role of the Commission of Regulation of Utilities within our country, the CRU, and looking at the role that affordability and competitiveness has to play within their mandate. But as we face into these kind of challenges, they will be made no easier and they will be made no less difficult for so many by adding to this an air of dishonesty or adding to this an air of cynicism regarding what a government or indeed what any politician can do. It is precisely because we are in difficult and volatile times that the government needs to do two things. Firstly, recognise what that means for those that we are privileged to serve, and we do, and look at what we can do in a way that can help, which is why Minister Chambers was right. And Minister Chambers and I and the government are very clear on what we can do and want to do in relation to this. I can't stand here in front of the House today and say that the level of payments that we've made available over the last number of years, that can become the norm. Those payments were made available at a time in which inflation was 5, 10, 15%. They were made available across a world that is very different to today. So that kind of level of payment is something that if we begin to normalise, if we say it's going to be available year after year, of itself runs the risk of creating difficulty to our country, to our economy in the years ahead. But as Minister Chambers said only today in relation to this, of course we know that as we approach the budget, as we respond back to the challenges that are there, we will look at what measures we can put in place that will be targeted, that can offer support to those who need it the most. We want to be clear in recognising the great challenge and worry that exists within our country at the moment, but equally honest in saying that we can't and won't do anything that adds to the risk that we may face, while at the same time want to identify how we can and will help.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Cullinane.
Well, Minister, undoubtedly there is volatility and there is uncertainty around the world. But there's also volatility and uncertainty faced by so many families who are struck and who are dealing with all of these increases, particularly in rising energy costs. You say, Minister, that you can't take to your feet and say to people with all credibility that we will continue with the supports that were previously put in place. And you say that knowing that price increases are on the way. But what you haven't said is that during the course of the election campaign, your party leader, of course, was well able to stand up and commit during the course of that campaign to cut electricity prices. So during the election campaign, you had one story for those struggling householders that will cut energy costs. Now you're coming in knowing and being told by the experts that energy prices are going to go up, that you're going to cut the supports for those families, roll back on supports for those families, and it's simply not good enough, Minister. What are people faced with? 5 more years of increases. They see bankers' bonuses go up, they see bumper profits for these companies, and they see a government who's going to throw all of those families under a bus.
Minister.
Well, of course, it's interesting you should bring up the election because you're representing the most unsuccessful opposition party in Europe at the moment. Yep. You are the only opposition party that managed to go into an election at a time prices were high and lose votes. You lost votes. And the reason why you lost votes is because the people of Ireland knew that the economic policies that you were bringing forward were not credible. If you promise everything, you are for nothing. You were so true at that time. And Corla, I've noticed the trend that Sinn Féin have now, where they grow unhappy when I interrupt their heckling. But that won't deter me, and it won't deter the government from doing two things. Firstly, Corla, from calling out the fact that your economic policies, your solutions were seen through. Where would we be now if we had followed your policies and be entering into this scenario with the government borrowing with jobs at risk?
Thank you,
That's what you offered. It was seen through. And as I said, Corla, despite the best efforts of the Sinn Féin opposition, the government will be honest in how we can help.
Thank you.
But what we will not do, Corla, is do so at the expense of honesty that is needed at a time in which the country, in which Europe is facing new challenges and new risks.
Respect the chair, please. Thank you, Deputy Marie.
Like, share, and subscribe, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.